Hi, this is Melvin McLeod, the editor-at-large of Lion's Roar. Welcome to my podcast series about my groundbreaking new book, With a Single Breath, The Complete Path of Mindfulness. In this series, I'll be speaking to some of the mindfulness leaders and teachers who have contributed to the book about the power of mindfulness not simply as a helpful meditation practice, but as a complete and transformative path of life. Today, it is my honor to welcome as the first guest on this series, John Kabat-Zinn, the founder of the mainstream or secular mindfulness movement, which I hope this book will make a contribution to. John, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. It's great to be here with you, Melvin.
So, as the title for my book implies, I believe that it is possible to both expand and deepen the benefits of mindfulness by defining it not simply as a helpful meditation technique, but as a complete path of life. And although in your, in effect, founding of the mainstream mindfulness movement through your creation of mindfulness-based stress reduction, you initially framed mindfulness in ways that were beneficial to one's mind and body, reduction of stress to help people to work with, physical suffering and such. It strikes me that for you too, from the beginning, you saw mindfulness or see mindfulness as a complete and transformative path of life rather than simply a helpful meditation technique. Am I right in that?
You know you're right in that, and I would go further and to say that anybody who understands mindfulness or anything that comes out of the Buddha's articulation of mindfulness understands that it was complete in the beginning, it's complete in the middle, and it's complete at the end. But the challenge for the individual practitioner, or for that matter, the Sangha, is to understand that and embody it in a multiplicity of ways that add up to a life of awakening, so to speak. And that's easy to say, it's easy to put into words, but it's only the most difficult thing for us human beings to actually instantiate or embody, even in one moment. So, from that point of view, I think your book is pointing at a kind of real possibility that everybody actually already knows, but to have it articulated in a certain way to remind everybody that it's not enough to be mindful in one area and completely ignorant of what's actually unfolding in various other areas of life, and not just one's own individual life, but the sense of community and also the sense of like the larger global situation that we find ourselves in now.
In the book, I presented a suggested framework for
Yeah.
mindfulness as a complete path of 5 elements, which are mindfulness meditation, the key one, insight, compassion, ethics, and community. What would be your description of the components of mindfulness? What would be your framework or components of mindfulness as a complete path? What would you include?
Well, my problem in answering a question like that is that I kind of come from a perspective where I really see everything as completely interconnected from the very beginning. So when I, for instance, take my seat in what you might call formal meditation practice, it's not merely instantiating some kind of algorithm for how to sit up straight and follow my breath and ride herd on my breathing and lasso it back when my attention wanders and things like that. But it's actually a kind of, in every moment, a kind of intention to mm, be in full relationship with the actuality of my own humanity and my own experience. And that, of course, is embedded in a genetic unfolding, through ancestors and through the miracle of life itself. And with the planet, breathing in oxygen, breathing out carbon dioxide, having the plants do the opposite, in every way, realizing that interconnectedness is the essential element of all life experience, and that the mystery is the mystery of experience. How is anything understood as being experienced without an experiencer? There's simply, and I like that in English at least we have the present participles to get us out of that subject-object dualism, so that we talk about sitting. We can say sitting, and we don't have to say I am sitting, which reifies somebody with an identity that's supposed to be carrying out some kind of algorithm, potentially for some kind of result. That would be the dualistic framework for it, but rather it would just sitting, and then we can experience what happens from moment to moment. I think what your book is doing is kind of reminding people, and more than reminding them, making very explicit offerings for how one takes a practice that could look a lot like just following an algorithm of paying attention, and have it become a way of being that really is complete, in the sense of there's no aspect of life that in some sense doesn't benefit from our being fully present with it and for it, and also to inquire in some deep way about the mystery of sentience, and who we wind up building a story around that we call I, me, and mine. And of course, that's kind of like the challenge of a lifetime. And so I feel like what you've done with this book really, makes a lot of that explicit, and you're bringing in a lot of teachers who have expressed different elements of it differently, in a way that I think is going to be very accessible for people, and also motivate them in some sense to remember what I just said about when you take your seat in formal meditation. It's complete in itself, because when you understand everything that's in your book, then there's no separation between anything. So it's all relationality, which is one of the few words that I feel is really synonymous with mindfulness. When reporters ask me, just give me what mindfulness is in one word, aside from the word awareness or pure awareness, the only other one I can ever come up with is relationality.
So I think that the mainstream or secular mindfulness movement is of historic importance as a genuine contemplative, authentic contemplative tradition, brilliantly conceived for the modern world because of this. Until now, really all of the effective paths or methods to personal, powerful, deep personal transformation and societal transformation have been offered in the context of religion, I would argue. But in today, millions of people do not particularly want to follow a religious path for all kinds of good reasons. And yet, they still long and they still need effective, powerful methods to work with their own lives, to make their own lives happy, meaningful, and beneficial, and to improve our society. So, what I think the really great accomplishment is of the secular mindfulness movement, if it is defined as a full path of transformation, is to offer all of those million people who are looking for effective tools for personal and social transformation that are based on common sense and evidence rather than on religious belief. So, in that sense, I think that the mindfulness movement, which you have founded, offers us an historic opportunity to offer a path of powerful transformation for all of us, all of those who are not especially interested in following any particular religion. That, I believe, is of historic importance.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more, although I steer as far away as possible from calling it secular. Because again, it's dualistic in my way of feeling about things. Because then you reify secular as opposed to sacred, but I see mindfulness as sacred. I see humanity as, in some sense, sacred, and the word sacred is even in the Declaration of Independence. Our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And there's something about the sacred that I don't want to give up by. So I tend to use the word mainstream mindfulness rather than secular mindfulness, because it just leaves a lot more room for the river to flow and even overflow its banks without being sort of um, pigeonholed in a certain way. But these are kind of like, when we're talking about how to language what's impossible to put into words, we really move into the domain of poetry and creativity. And so any book that's attempting to articulate uh, in a way that changes people's lives, that's the hope, is that reading your book or any book will actually wake people up, change their lives in some way that like is integrated across a whole range of different kinds of experiences and meanings and ages across the lifespan. That it's a very big task that we set ourselves. And so I feel like every element of what you've put in this book is going to touch somebody or other. Even in terms of completeness, what your book needs in order to be complete is the reader who is touched by it and then recognizes his, her, or their completeness. Then the book is complete. So, in that sense, it's a catalyst and a kind of real resource for people to recognize, I think, what you're emphasizing on virtually every page, which is there's no other moment in which you're complete. There's only this moment in which you're complete.
Well, and of course, what the foundation of the whole view is that by being present, what we're being present for is our own essential completeness and goodness, which has got covered over by various forms of confusion and delusion,
Yeah,
and also the completeness and goodness of our world. And
exactly.
so, if there is a premise to the mindfulness movement, to mindfulness practice, that would be it. That by being present, we discover that this reality is both of who we are and what our world is are essentially good.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I would say more than good. You know, I mean, miraculous beyond imagining. And Thich Nhat Hanh did actually call one of his first books "The Miracle of Mindfulness," and he wasn't exaggerating or being merely poetic. I think there is something that meditators recognize about presencing or awarenessing or showing up in a fully embodied, open, spacious, compassionate way that is um, miraculous, that it changes everything instantly, it, by which I mean that it wakes us up to the truest nature of ourself within the confines of our own skin, but we are not confined within our own skin through our eyes, ears, nose, mouth, tongue, uh, body, so forth. Uh, that we actually enter the kind of mystery of belonging in some kind of much larger domain than we really understand. And that has political and social consequences, because we still do not, as what's going on right now in Iran and every place else. I mean, with what the United States is doing, Venezuela, Iran, El Salvador, whatever you want to point to, we still do not know how to live on planet Earth. Humanity does not know, and we're destroying the environment, and planet Earth is at risk in certain ways for future generations. And since we are a kind of we all have belly buttons. So if you reach down and just do a mindfulness exercise to check, make sure that, the signature element of the human body in the belly button is that it was once connected to something larger. And I don't mean metaphorically, I mean absolutely literally. And we tend to forget the miracle of that, and that we have a certain kind of responsibility, since we're only here for the briefest moments of time, a lifetime, is to tend to what needs tending in a way that is maximally beneficial and minimally harmful in the flow of life or a consciousness or awareness in the world. And I feel like, so in talking about complete mindfulness at this moment, this is a challenge, not just to get more people to be good meditators, but to actually learn as human beings in societies and nations to govern ourselves in a way that doesn't wind up doing what we're seeing actually happening in this very moment, tomahawk missiles descending on, school children.
So everything that you're saying, I think, points to what to me is the fundamental both misunderstanding about the nature of mindfulness as well as the benefits of understanding in its fullness. So to me, mindfulness is a effect at its core a two-part practice. There is the first step, which is to stabilize the mind, to focus the mind, to quiet the mind,
or see how hard it is to stabilize the mind or focus the mind. So, and to be aware of that, that because the awareness of that is as good as seeing the mind learn to stabilize itself.
That's right.
That from that non-dual point of view, there's no way to not do this correctly. But if you're attached to a certain kind of calmness or some kind of reified outcome that's very romantic and kind of wise, you're creating a lot of trouble for yourself, as we both know.
But to the extent that one can create some form of stable or undistracted awareness, that the second part of the practice, which everything you've said points to, is to then take that focused mind, which is capable of resting long enough in reality to actually understand its true nature. And that is the insight part of the practice that is actually where the true transformation takes place. And why, when one understands mindfulness as a two-part practice, it then becomes a complete and transformative path of life. If one understands it only as the first part, the calming or stabilizing part, there are, of course, significant benefits to health and well-being, but its benefits are rather limited. Our minds have the inherent capability to both see and then to understand. And the mindfulness practice, to me, is a training of both capabilities.
Good point.
And but you can even see that right away in your very first teaching or practice, in which you offered to people who were suffering from physical ailments that there was an insight. The transformative power was in an insight into the nature of what they were experiencing, the nature of who, if anybody, was experiencing it.
Exactly.
So right from the beginning, even if we're talking about a relatively limited benefit, not that's unimportant, of trying to work with suffering and pain, that from right from the very beginning, insight was the key element.
Yeah.
And to me, it's insight that then answers all the questions about the critiques of mindfulness, all of which are based simply on defining mindfulness as the concentration part, but that an understanding of who we are, an understanding of what makes people truly happy and what doesn't, an understanding of what creates a good society and how to act ethically. The key element is understanding that mindfulness is, in effect, a two-part practice, of which the fruition or the real power comes from the insight that one can
the
achieve.
stabilizing of the mind, so that the stabilizing of the mind, so a certain kind of degree of calmness and collectedness and just settling, which a lot of the time people don't even realize when you sit down to meditate for the first time. People are astonished, like how like the mind never stops yakking. I mean, just ceaseless yakking. And a lot of it's about the body and like what's supposed to happen, right? I mean, I'm sitting here, I'm assuming a noble, sort of position, dignified posture. 5 seconds have gone by. What am I supposed to be feeling? And this is where the rubber really meets the road, because if you uh, create or reify a feeling that you're supposed to be feeling in meditation, then you'll be questing or striving to attain that feeling, even if it's shamatha, or calmness, stability of mind, for a very long time. Whereas if you actually jump to awareness itself, then you can realize immediately that you're not supposed to be feeling anything in particular. What you're in being invited to feel is what you're actually feeling in this moment, and recognize that you can be aware of it in a way that you are no longer imprisoned by it, caught up in it, especially if it's associated with anxiety or pain in the body or something like that. And so that is a very liberative insight from the very first moment, if the practices are taught in such a way that you don't reify a particular right way to practice that gets you to a particular result, because that's kind of attached to the result, as opposed to inquiry into the nature of the mind that is inquiring. And I think your book, is giving people as many doors as possible to actually, and you don't need to go through all the doors. All you need is one door, to have an experience that wakes you up to the fact that uh, it doesn't matter what's happening in this moment. What's really most challenging is how, or not challenging, but what's most salient is to, how am I going to be in relationship with this particular moment? And that's where there's no separation between mindfulness and heartfulness, or a sense of me as an individual monad and a we that's much larger than the me. We're referring back to the belly button, that who you think you are is not who you really are, because you're part of a flow that, a lifetime is like an insignificant moment of time in the history of even humanity, never mind the universe.
One of the so if we're talking about insight, and to my mind that is the catalytic element,
Agree.
um, then they're kind of conventional insights and transformative insights, for instance, into the nature of reality, that things are transient, they change, they disintegrate, that we do, that you could have insight into the nature of your own mind. But another kind of insight that I actually think is not pointed to sufficiently, that I think is really powerfully transformative, is insight into what truly brings us and others happiness, and what truly brings us and others unhappiness. Because in so many cases, we think that things that are going to bring us happiness, in fact, are going to bring us unhappiness. And in the book, I offer a series of both benchmarks and contemplations for us to each consider what it is that truly makes us happy. And I think one of the key benchmarks to me is that if we apply our insight to what the causes and conditions of happiness and unhappiness, what we discover is that real happiness is always win-win. It is never I'm happy and what's going to make me happy is going to make you unhappy. If it actually is going to make me happy, it's going to make you happy too.
Yeah, well, this is a fundamental practice in the, in the Buddhist tradition, to recognize actually what brings happiness and what is a prescription for, unhappiness or disaster. And just framing the question is like holding up a lens to your own mind and seeing, well, how's it working out? When you cling to a particular concept, for instance, and try to force the world to be a certain way, it generates a lot of feelings of discomfort and often anger or fear or resentment. Uh, and then you see that this is a play of mind and that awareness can hold all of that. Like, yeah, I'm attached to a particular kind of thing. And as soon as you recognize the attachment in a certain way, there's the possibility or the reality of in that moment letting go or letting it be. And then realizing that uh, in very large measure, you probably couldn't do anything to influence the situation anyway. And uh, and so can you just be with it as it is, which might actually allow you to see it much more clearly and then relate to it in a way that really is uh, contributing to some kind of benefit, to some kind of well-being, to some kind of, because mindfulness is not about sort of passive resignation. We talk about accepting things as they are, but how do you accept things that are horrifying, that are unjust, that are cruel, that are horrible? So accepting it doesn't mean that you resign yourself to it, but it means you recognize what is unfolding and then you respond in a certain sense with balance of mind and equanimity rather than merely anger and resentment and selfing to whatever degree is possible, not just by yourself, but potentially with community to move things in the direction of greater well-being, healing, uh, compassion, um, and this is, so it's like the world writ large and also small on one's meditation cushion or in life. I'll just say that, sort of my original intention in creating MBSR was um, certainly not as a therapy. I'm not a therapist and I'm not a psychologist, uh, but it was as a public health intervention. It was meant to move the bell curve of humanity towards exactly what you're pointing to in your book, like a greater understanding of the actuality of things and how we can interface with the good, the bad, and the ugly, so to speak, in ways that actually do promote well being, public health, the common weal on every level, from the individual and the personal, back pain, headaches, irritable bowel syndrome, hundreds of diagnoses that are referred to us in MBSR, people with these kinds of problems. But then actually, there's always so much more than that because each individual is embedded within a family and community and a lineage, a history of ancestors and people still to come. And when one recognizes or recognizes oneself in that kind of a more spacious way, then the world's already different. You have rotated in consciousness in a certain way, and you no longer believe the too small story of yourself that very often we've been creating for a very long time, which includes who my friends are and who my enemies are, and who's to blame for this and why I'm not or why. And that's very liberative because all of a sudden then you can, to use your word, rest in the full dimensionality of your being, rest in awareness. And that awareness is the puts us immediately in touch with the power of insight, as you were saying. And you can see relationality, you can see things as they are in ways that are potentially cooperative and collaborative rather than disputatory and aggressive. And I think that's what, in some sense, we all need to get back in touch with that core capacity. It's not like we don't already have it. It's access to it when we need it that's important, and that stabilizing the access is where the everyday, regular, disciplined meditation practice comes in.
So you had rightly used the word awareness throughout this conversation, and that there is a kind of common sense definition of awareness, which is kind of dualistic, which makes it synonymous with perception. I, the perceiver, I'm aware of that. It's happening outside of me or inside of me. But, and isn't there, though, a more profound definition of awareness that transcends that dualistic perceiver perceived process? And I think one of the things that you point to that I in effect quote in the book is that we are aware, of course, all the time. Otherwise, we wouldn't be alive. But the key element is that we are, when we in this through this practice, we become aware of our awareness.
Yeah.
Now, the question then is, and my question for you is, in the most profound way that perhaps transcends that dualistic perceiver and perceived understanding of awareness, what is the nature of that awareness we are aware of?
This is going to take a long time because I'm not going to open my mouth. There are certain things that you could talk around forever and never come to the actuality of it. And this is something that neither science nor religion has been able to actually completely thread this needle of defining sentience or human awareness. We don't know how it comes about. Neuroscientists, of course, think that it comes about through synaptic transmission in the kind of gazillions of synapses and hundreds of billions of neurons in the head. Okay, but rhinoceroses have rhinoceros awareness, right? I mean, they know if you're near them. They know where to get food. They know when they're upside down or right side up. I mean, they know a lot, okay? So do elephants. Are elephants living in the same consciousness as rhinoceroses? Obviously not. Elephant awareness is elephant, and cockroach is cockroach. I mean, and actually, even single cell organisms have a certain kind of sentience that Francisco Varela was pointing out a long time ago, the founder of the Mind and Life Institute. And that he called autopoiesis, that there's a certain something built into life itself that's self-knowing, not necessarily conceptual, because a bacterium doesn't have concept, but that's the mystery of this in a certain way. And so I don't try to define awareness. I feel like maybe other people can do that, but for me, it goes beyond subject and object. So very often, and besides, you say, well, awareness, that I'm aware of something like that, but there's an outside world and there's in here with me. But actually, that's not true. I mean, we're creating an outside world through upside down images. If you take the visual system, upside down images on the backs of both of our retinas, right? That's how the eyes work. Is upside down images on the backs of both of our retinas, and then somehow through the optic nerve and the occipital cortex and everything, we create the world out there, including this computer in front of me and your face on my screen. That's all fabricated, biologically speaking, and we know this to be so. Nobody knows how we go from that to John speaking with Melvin and actually feeling, even though we're 1,000 miles apart, that we're actually in the same room. We're in the room of awareness. We're in the room of the human heart when it is in some kind of resonance with each other, some kind of sympathetic resonance with each other, which is how understanding happens. Otherwise, you have no understanding. People can talk past each other, right? Isn't that the way we say it? Because there's no resonances established. We don't know how we do that. We don't know how we do it with facial expression, too. Even on a screen 1,000 miles away, your face is going through all sorts of changes. My eyes are, reading those changes without my conscious awareness. My face is doing the same thing. And we're interacting, or as Thich Nhat Hanh said, is part of our interbeing. And this is hugely mysterious. So rather than try to define awareness, I think our challenge at the moment is to really learn how to inhabit it as our default mode. In other words, this is our address. This is where we live in awareness. And a lot of the time, maybe our mind will wander. But if you look at it now, most of the time our mind is wandering and hardly ever in awareness. So that's where the mind wanders, you bring it back. This is the elementary mindfulness instruction. Mind wanders. If you don't know the mind is wandering, you'll be wandering for a very long time. So some recognition factor, we call awareness, all of a sudden realizes, oh my God, I forgot about the breath. I forgot about the body sitting here. I'll bring my mind back. Okay. And then 2 seconds later, it's off again. So this is a profound realization right at the beginning of formal meditation practice that you have no control over whoever you think you are. You have no control over your own mind. Never mind your eyes, your ears, your nose, your tongue, or anything else. So who are you then? That's the beginning of complete mindfulness. Who are you? And I think the only authentic answer is, I don't know. But I'm willing to actually live with the question and sort of see if there's not some way to explore the mystery of what it means to be human when I drop underneath name and form or history and story of me and all that kind of stuff. And I think that, that's why there is a mindfulness movement. It's not because of me. It's because this is the way we teach MBSR. It's a non-dual practice from the very beginning. And everybody who comes in, I think, for the most part at least, feel seen and met and recognized and heard and belong. And that's not often the case, even in mainstream medicine, where people feel like, they're just part of some giant system. And we're helping people to recognize this very aspect of their own humanity that we're talking about that actually is potentially liberating from pain. Doesn't mean the pain will go away, but it means differentiating between pain and suffering, which is hugely liberative.
In spite of your having presented mindfulness from the beginning as a complete path, as a complete experience, nonetheless, it is largely still defined broadly as a beneficial meditation technique to help body and mind. And even, I would say, all of the really excellent mindfulness teachers that are included in this book, they of course do teach mindfulness as well as with compassion or with ethics or with community. Nonetheless, I would argue that to really fulfill its mission of taking the next step in its development, that the mindfulness movement has to more explicitly define the practice of mindfulness as a complete transformative path of life.
Agreed. And it's an ongoing challenge to find skillful means and skillful ways to do that. So that's one of the core messages. And I would use the word wholeness rather than completeness, but they mean the same thing. That when you are whole, which is related to the words health, healing, and holy for that matter, so even that religious element, when you recognize your completeness, where does that completeness end? Is it end at the surface of your skin? Does it end in the alveoli of your lungs? I mean, it's a koan in its own right. And so I really bow to you for articulating this book, putting all the energy that you did into it, and what I consider to be an extremely sincere effort to try to articulate where things are at on planet Earth at this particular moment in terms of these intersecting ways of knowing that we could call Dharma streams, and make it sort of just as infinitely broadly available as possible with enough explanation so that and enough pointing at various teachers' voices who are all offering the sort of infinite diamond integrity of Indra's net, that it will be valuable for a great many people because they'll resonate with one aspect of what's in here or another in ways that You only need to resonate with one, and then your whole life is different forever. So thank you.
And thank you, John, for joining us today, for your contributions to the book, and for your historic role in founding the mainstream mindfulness movement. This is Melvin McLeod, editor-at-large at Lion's Roar and author of the new book, With a Single Breath, The Complete Path of Mindfulness. Join me for coming podcast episodes in which I will be joined by more leaders in the mindfulness field to talk about how we can practice mindfulness as a complete, transformative path to benefit our lives and the world.